Welcome to the new normal, understanding COVID-19 stress as communities recover, as presented by the Virginia COPES Warm Line. This episode, we are going to be talking about COVID-19 disaster reactions. This is the first episode in a three-part series. My name is Sadie, and I'm one of the team leads for the Virginia COPES Warm Line. Hopefully by the end of this video, we'll have a better understanding of the disaster timeline and common community disaster reactions. We'll be able to recognize that emotional, physical, behavioral, and cognitive reactions are common before, during, and after a disaster. And hopefully I will be able to promote familiarity with disaster relief resources for everybody. We're going to start with what Virginia COPES is. We are a mental health warm line that is part of the federal and state response to COVID-19. COPES actually stands for Compassionate, Optimistic, Person-Centered, Empowering Support. We are dedicated to supporting the mental health and well-being of Virginians impacted by the pandemic. Our counselors are prepared to talk to callers about pandemic-related stressors, as well as refer callers to community resources. Our number's on the screen here in this graphic, and you can call or text us anytime between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 5 to 9 on the weekends. We have counselors at the ready. I want to go over some disaster key points with everyone. Virginia COPES has been responding to the needs of Virginians during the pandemic since May 2020. What we know about disasters is that everyone is impacted in some way. COVID-19 left no one untouched by the residual impacts of the pandemic and stay-at-home orders. We also know that in the initial stages of a disaster and for some time after, stress and grief are very common reactions. Common reactions that we've seen on the warm line during the pandemic have been feelings of grief, loss, anxiety, depression, loneliness, worry, and frustration. But despite the very heavy emotions that are often elicited in a disaster, we also know that overall people are incredibly resilient, and they pull together to support one another and rebuild after a disaster. So there is always some hope. So during any disaster, we are going to see people go through this disaster timeline of emotions. We begin in this stage right here, which is the sort of average day-to-day feelings that you might have. A little bit, north of neutral, so hopefully in that positive range. With any disaster, there's the possibility that there might be some pre-disaster warnings or threats that would cause some anxiety or worry or sadness that would cause the emotions to sort of sink lower until we hit that initial impact. So for this pandemic, that might look like, the coronavirus being a significant enough threat for there to be stay-at-home orders, people losing lives, things like that. And in any situation, we will see that emotional spike hit pretty immediately as we go through a heroic phase into a honeymoon stage. And this looks like people cheering on first responders or healthcare workers like we saw during this disaster. And then as we hit that honeymoon stage, we then almost immediately, once again, go straight down in our feelings as we take inventory of all that has happened during the disaster. And this can be loss of life, loss of property, this can be loss of jobs, anything that is taking a toll on an emotional state directly related to the disaster. And as time passes, we might start moving upwards as we're feeling a little bit better about what's happened. There might be other triggering events that pull us back down into emotional lows of anxiety, depression, isolation, things like that. But we're always in that state of trying to work back up to that, average neutral that we were at. Although we will hit another low as we hit the anniversary of the disaster, which we would have hit last March. So you might have noticed that while you were starting to feel a little bit better, once we hit that anniversary date, things felt hard again. And that's because we start going into this reconstruction phase that has us working through stages of grief, realizing what was lost, whether those are people or sense of routine, whether that is the feeling of trust, depending on what's going on. And we might see some setbacks over time, but eventually we start to get back up to another average state for our emotions. And now this is typically what we see in a disaster timeline. We have pretty closely followed this timeline for the COVID-19 pandemic, although we are not currently out of the pandemic, even though we have hit this anniversary date. So we are in an odd combination of disillusionment and reconstruction. People are continuing to work towards that new normal, but decisions are still being made related to the disaster, and people are still responding directly to the disaster because we haven't fully come out on the other side. So this is new for us, but we can still sort of use this as a good guideline for what to expect with our emotional balance. How we respond to a disaster tends to fall on this spectrum in these four quadrants between behavioral, emotional, physical, and cognitive. We group them in this way so that it's a little bit easier to pinpoint what people are thinking and how they're responding. So we're going to begin with behavioral. With the most common things that we saw over the course of the warm line. So a lot of people called and were talking about how they were being more isolated or withdrawn from their social circles, which made a lot of sense because they were being asked to with stay-at-home orders. They were not feeling as close to people. They didn't want to bother them. Everybody was, stressed out, and they didn't want to add to that. And so they just sort of retreated into themselves, which makes sense. But we wanted to encourage people to reach out to loved ones and not feel as if they were being a burden. There's also a lot of nervousness or agitation, that sort of nervous energy that comes with uncertainty. We were getting a lot of information that was changing and was brand new at the very beginning of the pandemic, and people weren't sure what to believe or who to listen to or whether they should just turn off the TV in general. And we were able to talk people through what this nervousness stemmed from and what would be best for them to use to respond to it. In general, emotional responses tended to be related to anxiety and fearfulness. A big scary thing had happened. We were in the middle of a major disaster that most people had not seen in their lifetime. So people were calling and trying to process all of this fear and anxiety. A lot of people also called and said that they expected to feel more than they did, but they were feeling more just numb and disconnected. And that can be a common emotional response as well. Our bodies just get overwhelmed and we sort of shut off. And that makes a lot of sense. Now, when you're overstimulated, things like that just happen. In terms of physical reactions, we had a lot of people call and were very confused by what seems to be medical conditions. A lot of people were having difficulty sleeping. I know I personally had difficulty sleeping, even though my routine hadn't really changed that much. The fear that going outside and doing the things that I would normally do outside of my home was causing me to not be able to sleep very well. I had a lot of friends talk to me and say, ever since the pandemic started, my stomach is hurt all the time. I don't feel well. I don't think it's a medical thing, and I'm not really sure I want to go to the doctor anyway, given what's going on right now. And it was mostly just an anxiety response because of the fear of what could happen if you went outside and ran into strangers. There were also a lot of people who reported cognitive responses, and those can be particularly distressing because it feels like something is wrong with your brain. And so a lot of people were particularly reporting difficulty concentrating and poor memory problems. And that's because the brain, when it's panicking in a disaster situation, is putting its focus on things that are about survival. We are not focused on remembering, where our keys are or whether we bought milk at the grocery store last time. We're focused on, am I safe? A lot of people were forced to change their working environment because they weren't able to go into an office, or they were still supposed to be going to work as an essential worker, but now there was that added stress of there's a virus out there. And so that transition, that change, caused a lot of people to not be able to concentrate on what they were doing, and they were concerned about their job performance because they weren't able to focus. A lot of people needed to process what that meant for them or whether there was something wrong with them, and it was really just a cognitive response. So I wanted to be sure that we covered this today so that everyone would know if you're still feeling like this, that's completely normal. Or if you felt like this at the beginning of the pandemic, that's also entirely normal. We see a lot of varied responses in any type of disaster, and this is a huge disaster that has lasted a long time. And so there can be these sort of long lasting responses. Like I said, disaster reactions are completely normal. According to a survey done by the American Psychological Association, 47% of people have felt an increase in stress and anxiety during the COVID-19 pandemic. You might have been a part of that 47%. Now, we're in Reconstruction right now in the state of Virginia. Mask mandates are being lifted for vaccinated people, businesses are opening, schools are reopening, there's continued availability for vaccinations. You might be experiencing some stressors that you weren't expecting because a lot of people were looking forward to, mask mandates being lifted or businesses opening. But maybe you're not ready to remove your mask in public, or maybe you're not ready to be around other people who are unmasked. Maybe the idea of being around more people is stressing you out because you just still don't quite feel safe or ready. There's a fear of COVID-19 variants. We're seeing a couple of those, and we're not really sure what that means right now. You might be concerned about vaccine side effects. You're like, you know what? I know I need to go get this vaccine, but I don't know what it's going to do. That makes me worried. You might be stressed about, how to open safely. Maybe you own a business. You're like, I want to protect my community. I want to protect my customers. I want to protect my family. How do I do that? You're maybe recognizing the need for long-term mental health services. You're like, I have felt anxious or depressed or just big feelings in general. And now maybe I need to see a therapist, or maybe I need to see a psychologist. Maybe I want to have someone to talk to about things that have been brought up in the midst of the pandemic that aren't 100% pandemic related, but they still are on your mind. A lot of people are worried about childcare and school environments. You're going back to work, or you're going back to work in person, and are children going to be safe? Are they going to be in a place that is going to take care of them and put their needs at the forefront? What is the best way to do that even? And then, of course, maybe you're just stressed about having a new routine set up. Your routine could be, again, that you're going back into work in person. Maybe it's that you have always been working in person, but your new routine could be, all right, well, now I'm going to double mask now because I am going to be encountering more people than I was going to be. So it's just a matter of figuring out what works for you and figuring out how to best manage these stressors in a way that's healthy. So we have a lot of community reactions that we are going to see in this reconstruction phase. So communities are going to begin to assume responsibility for rebuilding. So they're going to be organizations or just groups of people in every community who are going to say, all right, this worked, this didn't work. We need to continue to put this outpouring of support into our community, or we need to find a new way to adjust the system. So to these new circumstances. So we found out a lot of people can work from home. Maybe we continue to allow people to work from home. Maybe we say, all right, well, we need to have better systems in place to support people who need leave for illnesses. There's going to be that sort of collective recognition for growth and opportunity to say, all right, we had this big disaster hit and we're coming through the end of the tunnel to see what's left on the other side. How can we make our systems better so that if something like this happens again, we're all going to be safe and supported? We want you all to know that in any situation, you can always use Virginia COPES as a resource. Our counselors are available 7 days a week, and they're eager to assist Virginians with any pandemic-related stressors that you might have. Our counselors can provide practical tools based on your unique situation. They can just be a listening ear if you just need someone to verbally process with. We have a lot of resources available that we can direct people to for referrals. Call or text us Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., or Saturday and Sunday, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., like I said before. Or if you're just really not feeling like talking to somebody, we have the Virginia COPES website, and a lot of our resources are listed there as well. I want to direct everyone to some additional resources. There's some information about coping with grief after trauma, coping with job stress, and building resilience. And of course, you can always direct any vaccination questions to the Virginia Department of Health. These links will be listed in the description below. So if anybody is interested, they can take a look at those for these specific needs. If you have any questions at all, you can email Virginia Copes at virginiacopes@gmail.com, or you can call the warm line at 877-349-6428. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I hope that we will see you in the other episodes.